So I'm very excited to welcome our next guest, Perla Villarreal, who I had the privilege of working with as a developer a few years back, and more recently in her role in the office of the CTO, helping to manage the ThoughtWorks Technology Radar. We first published the Technology Radar 11 years back. The past couple of years, I've been part of the group that helps to curate it. And you can imagine both the challenge and the opportunity of working across the globe in different companies, different industries, and different technology stacks, and being able to identify and articulate to the industry common patterns that we're seeing. You can also imagine how difficult a process that must be to manage, which has been the job of Perla for the past couple of years. So please, Perla, tell us about the Technology Radar.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, so to add to Brandon's great introduction, I also want to take a step back and introduce myself from a different perspective as well. So I've been at ThoughtWorks for almost 7 years now. In September, it'll be 7 years. And that's not necessarily common for people, from my generation. It's more common to switch jobs every couple of years. And part of what's kept me at ThoughtWorks, as cliche as it may be, is the culture. And really how we embody that culture in more than one way, but how we also give it priority as we continue to scale as an organization. So 2 years ago, when I started working more closely with the Technology Radar as the product owner of that asset, I started seeing how even some of these more cultural aspects that we talk about in our people interactions really come to life in a technical asset such as a Tech Radar. So that's really what I'm going to go through during this talk, is I'm going to go through a couple of these cultural themes and how I've seen them reflect across the years within the radar. So we'll start off with this one. So there is no such thing as a silver bullet. So this one is a good starter because I also reflect on, when I joined ThoughtWorks, I joined as a graduate from college. So it's the only experience I've had, but I also had the privilege of joining through ThoughtWorks University. And during that program, you really learn how to balance being a consultant and then taking on your role. So being a developer, quality analyst, or a business analyst. And one of the things I remember most is 9 out of 10 times when you ask a trainer something, the answer would be, it depends, right? So it's kind of an inside joke within ThoughtWorks that the predominant answer you're going to receive is it depends. And even, 7 years into my career, I work really closely now with our CTO, Rebecca Parsons, and sometimes she's having conversations with heads of tech across regions, and they'll ask for advice on a very particular situation, and her answer might be, it depends. And it really comes to show that every situation needs to be analyzed for what it is holistically. And the two blips that I picked to kind of really see that embodiment, even within the radar and within technology as an industry, are microservice envy and big data envy. So the blip microservice envy speaks to microservices, and microservices are a leading architectural technique, right? Odds are you've come across microservices if you work in tech. If you're part of my generation, maybe that's the only implementation you've seen in backend projects, right? And it doesn't mean that it's the right solution all the time. There are circumstances where implementing microservices can overcomplicate the situation. And it's also important to understand the intricacies that come when you adopt an architecture technique such as microservices. It's important to have automated testing. It's critical to have continuous delivery. All of these are complications and extensions that not every problem needs. So it's not always the right solution. In a similar way, big data envy speaks to the big data buzzword, right? In the last couple of years, I think we've all heard about data, how important it is to access data, to understand data, to look at data more closely. And organizations are seeing that there's techniques and technology that is very pivoted and very directed towards big data solutions. But it also turns out that not all data is big data. So big data envy speaks to that on the radar. And it's not always the solution that you need to be striving for. Sometimes there are simpler things to take that approach. So that's kind of the theme of this, right? It depends. It might be the right solution. It might not. And it's worth looking at everything from a holistic perspective. The next topic I decided to kind of really bring emphasis to is continuous feedback cycles. So at ThoughtWorks, we really strive to have a flat hierarchy. So when I was a developer in professional services, I didn't have a manager per se. I joined an account. I had people I was working with, peers I was working with, leadership on my account. And the way we approach performance cycles, the way we approach growth is your biggest asset is feedback. So we talk about getting feedback from everyone around us, and that's what speaks to our growth. That's what speaks to our performance. And very specifically, it's important to kind of emphasize that it's not just positive feedback, it's constructive feedback as well. And just how in those conversations, feedback helps us grow through our careers, and it's so important as individuals. It's critical when it comes to the development cycle. The blips that I decided to kind of pull forward here speak to that as well. So ESBuild is a JavaScript bundler that optimizes for speed. It promises to reduce speed, reduce time by a factor of 10 to 100. And that's why kind of it's on trial and it's so close to adopt, because it's not only critical to have feedback when developing, but it's critical to have fast feedback. You don't want to kind of build, walk away for 15 minutes and have to come back to realize there's something that's gone wrong. And Vite is very similar. It's a front-end tool that helps, and it's built on top of ESBuild and is also kind of prioritized for giving good feedback during the development cycle. Telepresence is a little bit different, but also feeds into the feedback cycle, the idea that feedback is critical. Telepresence is a tool that helps in the situations where you might need to deploy something in order to test it. So having to deploy it to test it also takes time and puts a hindrance in the feedback that we receive as developers. So telepresence aims to facilitate that local testing in order to help close that feedback cycle. The next one I have here is a culture of experimentation. And this one I really like, and I think there's a tidbit from the story I'll tell here that will feed into the next slide, so hold on to that as well. Lately, we've been talking a lot about innovation at ThoughtWorks. How do we foster innovation? How do we continue to be innovative? ThoughtWorks has a history of being innovative in the tech space, but how do we continue moving that forward? And a lot of the conversations come back to experimentation. But recently, in one of the conversations that Rebecca Parsons, our CTO, was leading, she spoke to making sure that when we talk about experimentation, we leave room for making mistakes, for failure. If you're succeeding at every experiment that you're taking, are you actually experimenting? So that's part of kind of the culture that we try to have when we talk about innovation, but also when we talk about careers, right? So I joined as a developer, a lot of my background's in development. And when I jumped into this role, it was a bit of an experiment that ThoughtWorks was willing to take to kind of let me give it a try, see if I could grow and move forward in this role. So I think experimentation can be critical in a lot of different aspects, and it has been within ThoughtWorks. The two blips that I kind of brought out here are a little bit different. So switchback experimentation speaks very much to experimentation. It's a tool that's designed to make two groups independent during A/B testing. So it's kind of our way of encouraging A/B testing, saying that testing is critical to product development, and this tool is here to help. But rethinking remote stand-ups takes a little bit of a different approach, but I also think it really embodies the culture of experimentation. When we talk about stand-ups, the whole idea is that you can be standing up, that a stand-up can last a couple of minutes, you won't get tired, you won't get restless, and you'll move on with your day. It serves a purpose. However, when the pandemic hit, things changed a little bit, right? I couldn't have a talk casually at the coffee station. I couldn't pick up my laptop and go talk to Brandon and Scott about the bugs that I was experiencing or the approach that I was taking, and to kind of help mitigate what that had caused in some teams. The idea of rethinking remote stand-ups came up, and it was asked to say, let's experiment with making stand-ups a little bit longer. Shocking, like we've always talked about making them quick and concise, but let's experiment with making them longer to give room for some of these conversations. And that's what that blip speaks to. It speaks to adapting when things have changed and experimenting. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe there's nothing to replace that side coffee chat, but it's worth giving it a try and experimenting with that. So as I mentioned, to hold on to the idea of making mistakes, the next one is a culture of sharing mistakes and wins sometimes. So at ThoughtWorks, the technology radar in itself is an embodiment of this. We only put technologies on the radar if we've tried them, if we've experienced them. And those that end up on hold, maybe they didn't work out so well. So we're sharing that knowledge to let other people know. And the wins, when it does work out really well, we share those within Adopt. And we say, this worked out really well for us. You should give it a try next time you need something like this. Last year was the 10th anniversary of the radar. And in celebration, we published an article that spoke to the Tech Radar's greatest hits and misses. And that's some of the blips that I'm showing here. And it continues to embody that we can share with our audience that sometimes we made mistakes. The two mistakes I thought about pulling forward were experience design in the assess bucket, right? Experience design is an embodiment of a lot of practices, very critical practices to product development, to software development. And the fact that we put it in assess probably meant, we weren't really representing a wider audience than we would have hoped to. So when that happened, we learned from that. We learned from that mistake. We make sure that our crowdsourcing is a little bit wider, and to realize that the Tech Radar is more than just by developers for developers, that it takes a wider community to produce software, to produce good software. The other one, I find it really interesting. So in 2010, we published Java End of Life. And at that time, it made sense. There was some conversations about, Java had slowed down. And if it was the case that it was the end of life of Java, we needed to mitigate that risk. We needed to talk to our clients and to our audience and let them know that change might be coming. It's now 2022. And just earlier, I was having a coffee chat with a mentor of mine, a mentee of mine, and she asked, if I'm trying to learn object-oriented programming, what language should I try? It was Java, right? So Java hasn't gone anywhere, and that was a mistake that we made, but it also speaks to the idea of when you mitigate risk, right? It doesn't mean that it's happening. It means it's a risk. It's a potential, and we should talk about it and assess it. But it's safe to say that Java is still around a couple of years later. And I like to celebrate our wins as well, because I think there's also knowledge from doing that. Infrastructure as code was first blipped in 2011. And today, it continues to be really pivotal technique and something we continue to talk about actively, particularly during this phase that we're moving into kind of the cloud space. So it was a big win to talk about it so early on, and it continues to be relevant today. This next one is probably my favorite. It's the preference for open source software. When I was preparing for this, I started looking at kind of what is the ThoughtWorks stance on open source. And I pulled a quote from our website, and it reads, "ThoughtWorks believes that software quality is driven by open communication, review, and collaboration." And I thought that was so powerful, right? Open communication, review, and collaboration. But it goes beyond software quality. I think we can say career growth is driven by open communication, review, and collaboration. Consulting is driven by open communication, review, and collaboration. Product development, software development is driven by open communication, review, and collaboration. I think it helps tie everything together, right? We talked about feedback. We talked about sharing our mistakes. And that is kind of the embodiment of open source software. And that is why we put so much trust on open source software as an organization as well. So the two blips here, they represent some open source software that we have on the radar. There's so much more, so I urge you to look through that as well. OpenTelemetry is an open source platform that helps with metrics. OpenZeppelin helps build smart contracts from a security perspective. So for us to trust open source for metrics and security really speaks to the power of open source software and collaboration. So that's the 5 themes that I wanted to kind of bring forward. But I did want to close by sharing that when we had our last Radar production, as a team, Brandon mentioned, like as a group, we had an exercise to talk about some of these cultural themes that we see within the Radar. And there was a list of maybe over 20. So this is just the tip of what you can find when you really look a little bit further as you're reading the Radar. So I urge you to take a look a little bit deeper next time you're looking through the Radar. Thank you.